Knowing how to repaste a GPU is a helpful skill to have, as sometimes you'll buy a used GPU and it'll either be overheating or maybe you just want to go ahead and replace the thermal paste just to make sure. Now, I already tested this card and it seemed to be fine, but I had already bought thermal paste and stuff so that I could teach you guys, and so I figured I'd go ahead and do it anyway. Now, to do this, you're going to need some thermal paste for the die itself. I got some MX4 stuff from Arctic for that. Some K5 Pro thermal goop from Computer Systems, some isopropyl alcohol, a Phillips head screwdriver, and probably some needle nose pliers and some little tweezer stuff to help remove cables. You're also going to grab some paper towels so that you can wipe off thermal paste. Now, the first step is to remove every single one of these screws from the back plate. This could take a while. Now, you want to make sure to organize your screws so that you don't lose them or put the wrong screw in the wrong place. If you put a screw that's too long and a hole that's too short, you could very well damage your card or potentially even kill it. And in case you're wondering, that's not fun. There we go. Now, all of these screws go into the back plate and are the exact same. So I'm going to take them and put them in a pile off to the side. Now, I should just be able to lift up on the back plate and hopefully it'll pop right off. There we go. That was scary. I didn't like that. Now, as you can see here, there is actually a thermal pad on the back. This is to help dissipate some heat from what are probably the VRMs, or voltage regulation modules, over here on this side of the card, the other side. Now, this pad still feels pretty sticky and kind of squishy, so I'm not going to replace that with my K5. I'm only going to be replacing the pads that I think actually need it. Now, the next step is going to be to remove these 4 screws that are holding the PCB to the cooler. These actually mount the die, and while they have springs and stuff, I'm going to try to loosen them in a similar amount of torque on each in a diagonal pattern, because this is a bare die, and if you put too much torque on the corner at once, you could potentially crack it. I think that it's very unlikely that you would crack it while loosening the screws, but it is potentially possible, and so I would suggest just erring on the side of caution. Now that we have those off, we want to make sure that there aren't any other screws holding this down. Do you see any screws? I see one here, but I already checked, and it is only holding the I/O bracket to that. But there is a screw here, and I think that might be tied into the cooler. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. There we go. I'm going to put that to the side. Since there are any screws, we need to start looking for cables. The cables can be kind of fragile, and if you yank them out without, blowing them out correctly, you could break them. I don't see any, so now we play the scary, but necessary game of pulling the PCB away from the card, the cooler, hopefully without breaking anything. It takes a surprising amount of force. It can be pretty scary, but you just have to kind of trust yourself. And oh wait, there's a few screws on the side over here still holding this I/O shield in place. I'm gonna go ahead and take those off. That's why you really do not force things with this. PCBs are fragile. If they break, you are not going to have a fun time. Okay. Oh yeah, those were holding it. That is why you always have to be careful and take your time. So I've got those off, and as you can see, there is a cable here. And oh wow, there's some Mickey dust in there. So I'm going to try and pull this cable on out. Sometimes you can leave the cables in and operate on the card. This is a very short cable, and so it's gonna have to come out. There we go. So let's look at this. This here is an absolutely massive cooler. I mean, compared to the likes of a 4090 or something, nah, but it's still chonky. So let's test these. These still feel kind of sticky, but I mean, oh, I don't like how this one feels. This one feels kind of flaky. I don't know if that's how it's intended, and got a whole vat of K5, so I'm just gonna use that. But you can see here you have copper. This is potentially a vapor chamber. I'm not completely sure. It might just be a kind of slab of aluminum with heat pipes running through. But we have 3 heat pipes running across here to 2 fin stacks, and there are 3 axial fans blowing down through it. So, how do you repaste a card? And you can go to Gamers Nexus for all your fancy card, cooler breakdowns. Well, the first step is to remove the old stuff. So I got a paper towel, got some isopropyl alcohol, and the thermal paste on here looks plenty good. This card is just fine, but this is for educational purposes and so that I can be absolutely confident that this card will be perfectly fine for overclocking. Because I am going to overclock this bad boy and teach you how to do the same to your card. Okay, so there's some thermal paste on the sides here that I'm trying to get up. Doesn't matter too much if you get that up. Thermal paste is not electrically conductive. It shouldn't hurt anything, but it does make a little bit of a mess, and so, it's just a little bit nicer to keep things clean. Okay, I hereby pronounce that good enough. It's a mess, but who cares? Now, I'm going to go ahead and take a fresh paper towel and wipe down these memory dies. This card has 8 gigabytes of GDDR5. It looks like it's spread across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Looks like 17 packages. That's weird. I'm guessing it's 16 memory dies, and then there's one other package for something else, but I honestly don't know. Yeah, so, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not too thrilled by this thermal pad here, so I'm going to go ahead and pull it off. Now, this is a kind of messy maneuver, to be honest. You're going to make a mess. You're going to get thermal goop everywhere. And you'll just have to clean it up. That's the way of life. Sometimes it'll come off a little bit nicely, but fortunately, it usually won't, especially not this stuff. So I'm just kind of grabbing at it, pulling it off as best I can. And I've got it down to, what even is this? It looks like a kind of metal heat sink here. Almost feels like plastic, but there's no way that's plastic. It's got to be metal. Now these heat pads, these, to be honest, feel perfectly fine. So I'm not going to mess with that. I'm going to leave those be, and I'm just going to be repasting the GPU itself. And let me remind myself how this thing fits on. I'll be adding some thermal paste to the VRAMs around here, some K5 to the VRAMs. So, to do that, all you do is pop off this here cover, take this here stick, put the stick in the goop, and put the goop on your components. So, you just make an absolute mess of things. You just slather it in the goop. You want all the goop. And yes, it is really hard to get this goop stuff off. Yes, it looks kind of ugly, but it works. Thermal pads, you have to measure the height of thermal pads, make sure you get just the right height, yada, 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 all that stuff. It's really annoying. But with this, you just slather it on. Plus, this is actually more performant. Has a higher thermal conductivity, and it is still not electrically conductive, which is a quick note, a very good thing if you're slathering it on things. You don't want to slather liquid metal on stuff or you will kill everything. You might need more than one things of K5. You can run out surprisingly quickly. So the card only had this heat sinked, this side. There was maybe a tiny bit on this. I'm going to put a little bit And this guy over here, I think this does come in contact with the heatsink, so yeah. But as I said before, I'm not going to be redoing the memory dies because those thermal pads feel fine and I don't have enough goop even if I wanted to. So I have a little bit of goop left in here. Gonna wipe that off and close it on up, and then I can reuse this later, which is amazing because I mean, use cases for thermal goop outside of computer stuff is non-existent, but hey, I like computers and I'm gonna find a way to use it. So now that that's on, we're going to go ahead and repaste the die itself. Now this is actually a little bit scarier than it may seem. This is a bare die. Now, with a CPU, you have your IHS, so integrated heat spreader, and you have a bare die under that, which then has a thermal interface material, or TIM, between the silicon die and your IHS. So when you're putting thermal paste on the IHS, it's really just like a, get enough heat away. But here, if you don't have thermal paste on all of it, there is a chance that you could have some little tiny circuit in there or something that doesn't have a sensor, that overheats, your computer doesn't know about it, and it dies. So since thermal paste doesn't degrade performance if you put a bunch on, we're going to be a bit liberal. I'm going to put a dash there, a little bit there, a little bit there, and that should be absolutely plenty. I mean, normally you're going for a pea-sized dot. This is like 3 tuna fish. That's way more than we need. I'm kind of regretting putting that much on now, to be honest, but at least it's not gonna overheat. Okay, so I just realized I missed some goopy spots and put some stuff in places where there wasn't goop. So I think I may have put some goop on some heat sinks. Might not be the best, but I mean, hey, it'll be fine, right? I mean, what could go wrong? Yeah, so I'm just kind of gooping everything over here that needs goop. And I'm going to take this goop and spread it over to this guy and that guy, because I know something over here touches something, and I mean, I just want to make sure I have the stuff good, because once again, thermal paste isn't conductive, and I mean, its whole point is transferring heat. So yes, there's the loss of surface area and pins and stuff. That's not great, but it should hopefully be fine. So I'm gonna take this and PCB in hand, grab this cable and kind of place the board onto the connector, pushing it in with your thumb. There we go. Now you just line everything up, and if you're like me and foolish and coated the wrong stuff in thermal paste a little bit, you put a bunch of heat sinks that you've covered in thermal goop down into a hole, and now they're just sitting there covered in thermal goop. When you do this, don't cover the heat sinks with thermal paste. It's probably fine, but I actually don't really know. I'm hoping it's fine. I'm guessing it's fine. This thing is pretty beefy VRMs, so yeah, but you know what? I'm going to run the card, and if it dies, I will tell you. But when you do this, check by taking the card, the PCB, and kind of hovering it over where you're putting it to see if things are lining up where you need to put your thermal paste and whatnot. But you always want thermal paste on the GPU die, and for the memory pads, you just kind of coat stuff like I showed you. But sometimes there are heat sinks on your VRAMs. Sometimes there aren't. In this case, there were heat sinks directly attached, so I just coated those in K5. Probably not the best, but as I said, I'm going to be running this card. If it dies, I will put some in the description like, really don't do that. But I'm guessing it's probably fine, and I made sure I got K5 on these, whatever they are, that are also in the VRAMs back here. So yeah, just make sure that you're putting K5 where it needs to be, and not just putting it everywhere like I did. But anyway, do as I say, not as I do. let's go ahead and install these screws. And now as you're tightening them down, you definitely want to make sure that you are doing them in a way where you are not just putting all the pressure on one side, then all the pressure on the other side, so on and so forth. So, going to screw them in just enough to stay, like that. And then get this one over here. And get this one over here. And now tighten, tighten, tighten. 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 You're basically just wanting to not like crank down one before all the others. It's just in general, you know, a better way of doing things. It's not too big of a deal if, you know, you don't do them all at the exact same time, whatever, but, you know, just in general. So now we're going to go in and take this, put this back on. This is the thermal pad that I believe goes on the back of those V-rings, so there's a heatsink on the front, but as I said, that thermal pad seems fine. So yeah, now I just go around and replace all of these screws, and then replace the couple screws in the I/O shield, and then we should be done. Okay, there we go. Let's put those screws back in over here. Okay, so got the graphics card assembled again, and now it's time for everyone's favorite part: clean up. So the GPU's in my rigged, and I just finished running a TimeSpy stress test in 3D Mark. Coming over to hardware info, the core maxed out at 65 degrees Celsius, and our VRAMs were about 78, 79. And all of our other temperatures, memory and stuff, were also 65 degrees Celsius. So that's perfectly fine. Unfortunately, I didn't have baseline temperatures for the VRAM before I went and slathered a bunch of thermal goop all over them. But seems like it's fine, and worst comes to worst, I can buy like, you know, a $10 heatsink off of AliExpress to pop up there on there to make sure everything's good. But to be honest, I mean, our FPS is like 27. That's not much FPS. So I'm guessing it's going to be overclocked, this card, unless it's an amazing overclocker. This one's just going to go into storage for future runs. But thanks for watching, and look out for my in-depth GPU overclocking video, because there's a good chance that's going up tomorrow.